Thomas Jefferson once said, "Peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none." These are words we should live by today as the U.S.-backed Hosni Mubarak government loses power in Egypt, and especially as countries all through the Middle East are facing civil unrest. Here now to discuss a libertarian take on this foreign policy minefield is Michael Scheuer, the former head of the CIA's bin Laden unit. Michael, it's a pleasure. Welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Thank you, Judge.
What is the best that we can hope for as an outcome to the horrendous violence in the streets of Cairo as we speak?
Perhaps the best we can hope for is that Americans will go back and read what the founders said about the dangers to American interest of intervention in foreign countries we don't understand, and love for governments believing that they will somehow reciprocate that love. I'm always antsy to talk to you, Judge, about the founders because you're the expert, but the founders predicted exactly the price America would pay for what it has done regarding backing tyranny in Egypt and backing the state of Israel without question in everything it wants to do.
Should we have given Egypt $60 billion in the Mubarak era and many times that number of American taxpayer dollars to Israel during the same time period?
Well, we labor, sir, under the delusion that what happens to Israel and Palestine makes any difference to the United States. In terms of the money we gave to the Egyptians, we needed to bribe Mubarak so he would behave as if Egyptians didn't hate Israel. And of course, we supply Israel with whatever it wants because our Congress, much of our media have been subverted by people who put Israel above the interests of the United States. So the money came from those two places.
How dangerous is this uprising? I'm thinking, and I just finished chatting with Congressman Ron Paul about this. You remember it. Americans cheered when the Shah was kicked out. And then the government that came in, as bad as the Shah was, American puppet that he was, the government that replaced him was far more horrific, far more horrendous, far more dangerous than the Shah.
Well, Judge, I think in Egypt, the reality of the situation, no matter which side you back, I guess, is there are two entities in Egypt that can govern. Mubarak's government can govern the country, or the Muslim Brotherhood has the apparatus because it has been involved in social services and feeding people and education. They have an apparatus that can govern. So if Mubarak goes, whoever comes into power, whether it's Mr. El-Baradei or someone else, the talent, the organizational talent of the Muslim Brotherhood will be essential to any successor government.
Do the people in the streets, we're watching them as you and I are speaking, understand that much of the weaponry that they are standing up and facing now was paid for by American dollars?
Yes, I think only inside the Beltway can anyone believe that the people in Egypt are going to forget that it was the money and the guns of the United States that helped Mubarak to stay in power over the past 30 years. Now, that may have been in our interest to do, Judge, but, you know, just because you're a Muslim doesn't mean you're stupid. And they realized that the weapons and the money of the United States were essential to maintain the dictatorship of Hosni Mubarak.
Michael, you got to come back. We could talk about this for hours. Thanks very much for joining us.
Pleasure, Judge. Thank you.
Insights on what's got the stock market doing so well and who owns most of our debt. Hint, it's not China. My freedom fighters are back next. Yesterday, the Dow broke 12,000 for the first time in over 2 years, and we held above that mark again today. With Egypt and the Middle East on the brink, our stock market is on a tear. Why? Here to discuss, Fox Business Network senior correspondent and my good buddy Charlie Gasparino, radio host Leslie Marshall, and Mises Institute chair Lou Rockwell. Now, Charlie, I'll start with you. I know that the stock market is just one of the measurements of how the economy is doing. But it is one that a lot of people look at and understand, especially as middle America invests more and more. So why is the stock market going up when the Middle East is falling apart?
Well, I mean, we don't know the ultimate outcome of what's going on in Egypt just yet, or
Right.
how will it spread. I wrote a fairly provocative column the other day saying we could see stagflation in the future, but that's the future. You know, stagflation is high unemployment, high inflation. That's the future. If you look at just the basics right now, there's a lot of reasons to buy this market. The reason why, main reason, you have interest rates at zero. Why would you put your money in a money market fund? You have the economy improving. You have Obama backing off his plan to raise taxes. In the short term, the next year, that's actually pretty good stuff.
All right, Lou, the stock market is Wall Street. Wall Street is the banks is the government is borrowing money that it can't afford to pay back, and the Federal Reserve printing money. Stated differently, should we even be using the Dow Jones Industrial Average as a benchmark to how well the economy is doing?
Well, maybe it's a canary in the coal mine in the same way we should have seen the Greenspans boom or the boom in the 1920s in the stock market. We should have seen those as not a good thing, as indicative of tremendous distortions that all the Federal Reserve subsidies to Wall Street and the big banks is causing. So here, the rest of the country is in a very deep recession, no matter what they say in Washington. On the other hand, the Federal Reserve is pumping in the dough for Wall Street, the big banks, the government itself. They're all doing well. It's not good news for the rest of the American people, however.
Leslie, isn't Lou right? Because unemployment is still hovering around 9.5%. The president only went along with extending the Bush tax cuts, kicking and screaming, because he had this lame duck issue to address. Shouldn't this not be something to rejoice over, or should it?
Well, I've always said it's not if the economy's better, but the American people's perception if the economy is better.
And is the Dow Jones
that,
an accurate barometer of that perception?
Oh, come on, Judge. You know, it's only an accurate barometer when there's a Republican in the White House and the market's doing well, and they can say, yeah,
guys are mixing
legislation's
apples
working.
you're mixing apples and oranges here. I mean, listen, corporate profits are corporations are generally doing pretty well right now.
Well, that would be corporations that got loans from the government?
No, everybody. They're doing well. They pared down. They're not hiring people. It's a jobless recovery. Listen, I'm the first to criticize this president.
Well, so
but when you invest, listen to me.
The middle class is suffering because unemployment's near 10%.
Could you just give me a second? When you invest in the stock market, you are investing in those companies that are doing better. I'm not saying that the economy is great guns, because we have 9% unemployment. Those companies are shipping jobs overseas. They're downsizing because they don't want to pay for Obamacare. They're doing all this stuff to prepare for that. But they are making money. We're going to have 3 to 4% GDP this year. Now, Lou Rockwell may say that that's an inaccurate measure because it's measured in dollars, not in gold. But I'm telling you, the world sees that as 3 to 4% growth. So does the markets.
How can we have a recovery when we're borrowing $1.5 trillion? That's what the president wants to do, Lou. After the $4 trillion he already borrowed, after the $2 trillion that George Bush already borrowed, and with unemployment near 10%, how can anybody call that a recovery?
No, and as you know, the actual unemployment rate is more like 20%, as John Williams of shadowstats.com, or even the BLS will tell you it's actually much closer to 20%. And so we have, we're still in a very deep recession. Individuals are not buying in the stock market.
No, we're not
it's
in a
the
recession.
Big pension funds,
we're not
the big
in a
mutual
recession.
funds.
We are not in a recession.
And they're all, of course, connected to the government.
I mean, listen, no, we're not in a recession.
Hang on.
We're not in a recession.
Hang on. Leslie, are the Democrats, the left side of the Democrats, because I've spoken to some of them on air and here in our hallways, still upset at the president for having gone along with retaining the Bush-era tax rates?
Yes, and I'm one of them. I understood why he did what he did, and it certainly politically makes him look good at the end of the day. But financially, we know the past 10 years, they did not result in job creation. They did not stimulate the they did not stimulate the economy. And now those rich folks have a responsibility to hire people and offset the unemployment.
I guess the answer to my question is yes. The Democrats are not happy that President Obama went along with keeping the Bush tax.
Judge, if you ask businesses why they didn't hire, all those tax increases that were planned. Right. That was one of the reasons.
Right. Last question, Lou. Were you surprised to learn that the Federal Reserve owns more federal debt than China does?
Well, I was glad for the poor Chinese. Maybe I hope they're not buying too much more of this Federal Reserve paper. But I think it's indicative of the amount of the deficits, as you've talked about, and the Federal Reserve is monetizing the debt, which is the most inflationary thing they can do. So we face very difficult times ahead. Already commodity prices, of course, are zooming. We're going to face zooming prices otherwise. I hope that the bunch in Washington doesn't act like Richard Nixon did and give us price and wage controls again.
Charlie Gasparino, Leslie Marshall, Lou Rockwell, thank you for joining us. Up next, the plain truth on Obamacare, Congress, and the Constitution. Does the government work for us, or do we exist to serve the government? Are the Constitution's guarantees of freedom real guarantees, or can the Congress do whatever it wants? Tonight, health care and sound money. Since U.S. District Court Judge Roger Vinson declared the Affordable Health Care Act unconstitutional in its entirety earlier this week, the Democrats and the big government types have been scratching their heads over what to do next. Judge Vinson quite properly ruled that the Constitution does not authorize the Congress to compel folks to purchase anything, whether that be gym memberships or broccoli or health insurance, no matter what Congress's goal may be. Congress's goals may only be those authorized by the Constitution. But Congress sets its own goals, whether authorized by the Constitution or not. We know that. Congress simply doesn't care about the Constitution. We know that. Members of Congress want to give away your hard-earned dollars to their friends in return for votes. We know that. Congress does whatever it thinks it can get away with. We know that. That's why we have judges. Judges are the anti-democratic branch of the federal government. Their job is to protect us from the tyranny of the majority. Their obligation is to enforce the Constitution, come what may. If they hate the law that is being challenged, but the law is a proper exercise of the power the Constitution grants to the Congress, they are to find that law constitutional. On the other hand, if they love the law being challenged, if its goals are noble, if it actually eradicates evil, but if the Constitution does not authorize the Congress to write that law, they are to declare it unconstitutional. And once a law has been declared unconstitutional, it no longer exists. If members of Congress could rewrite the Constitution as they saw fit, if judges could not prevent them to do so, then nothing short of violence could prevent the majority from taking whatever property or liberty it chose. Congress has not only stolen your freedom to choose or to decline health insurance, it has also raised taxes on future generations by borrowing money to run the government. Every time a modern president has asked the Congress to authorize more borrowing, the Congress has said yes, every time. In just the past 4 years, the Congress let President Bush borrow $2 trillion. And in just the first 2 years of his presidency, President Obama has borrowed $4 trillion. Now he wants to borrow another $1.5 trillion. How, you ask, does that raise taxes? That's an easy one, but you won't hear it from Congress. Just like you and I, the government must pay interest on all the money it has borrowed. Most of that interest comes from taxes. Right now, nearly 33 cents of every tax dollar collected by the government goes to paying the interest to those who have loaned money to the feds. As the government borrows more, lenders charge it higher interest rates, and that will force future Congresses to raise taxes to collect the revenue to pay that higher interest. The government is so bad at managing money that it sometimes even borrows money to pay the interest due on money that it has already borrowed and spent. No household and no business could get away with that, and no country can get away with it very long. In come the Republicans. Tonight you heard from three who are very serious about this. Congressman Ron Paul, Senator Jim DeMint, Senator Pat Toomey. They will not vote to let the government continue borrowing. But will their colleagues join them? If Republicans all vote to deny the president the authority to borrow more, they will force fiscal responsibility for the first time in modern times. If Republicans vote to let him borrow more, they will force their own retirements from Congress for the last time. Tomorrow on Freedom Watch, that beautiful libertarian TV star, Suzanne Summers, and that successful libertarian businessman, Herman Cain. From New York, defending freedom every night of the week. So long, America.